Egyptian national holiday marking the beginning of spring. It always falls on the day after the Eastern Christian Easter, following the custom of the largest Christian denomination in the country, the Coptic Orthodox Church. The holiday is celebrated by the Egyptians regardless of religion. The name of the holiday is derived from the Egyptian name of the harvest season, known as Shimo, which means a day of creation. And according to the writings by Plutarch, during the 1st century AD, the ancient Egyptians used to offer salted fish, lettuce and onions to their diet on this day. And speaking to us more about it and explaining thoroughly, we have joining us Dr. Maraim, the Associate Professor of Egyptology at AUC. Welcome, Dr. Maraim, and thank you so much for having me today.
Dr. Maraim, thank you very much for being with us today on my cruise, first of all. So, in ancient Egypt, the difference between official religions and the festivals and the holidays was not clear. How far is this true?
No, the difference was quite clear actually. So what we see on temple walls and in tombs are usually depictions of state-sponsored festivals. These were celebrated by the king, the priests, and the highest echelons of the elite. Regular people, common people, probably would not have much role in these festivals. Instead, they were more bystanders, and they would wait for the occasion of the bringing out of the statue of the god from the temple to maybe ask for a blessing or ask a question in terms of an oracle or something. But in terms of feasts and feasting, we know very little about the lives of the little man from ancient Egypt. Most of what we know, at least from the iconography, is about state religion and what the king did and what the priests did on official state occasions.
So the kings and queens and the state men back then.
There's a major distinction between state religion, the
popular version of religion,
and the popular version.
Yeah, that's the next question we're coming up to. So,
so state religion is what you see on the temple walls.
Okay.
Because we have to remember that in ancient times, the temples were not a place for congregation, but rather it was just for the gods to enjoy meals. The temple was like the living room of a god in ancient times. It was not a place for people to congregate.
Yep.
So only
access was very restricted to the temple.
Highly restricted, and even within the priesthood, not all ranks of priests could get into all parts of the temple.
The access to the temple, basically.
The priests, and then within the temple hierarchy, the highest echelons of the priests would get into the sanctuary, the high priest and the king. But then regular priests, known as Wab or Pure One, they were just limited to the outer courtyard of the temple, and then the common people were not allowed in at all.
And did the kings get to be picking up the priests?
In theory, the king in Egypt was the ultimate high priest, but in practice he couldn't be at all the temples officiating for all the gods at all times. So he delegated that responsibility to the high priest, who at times was his son or brother or a very high-ranking courtier. So I'm sure that the king was very well acquainted with the high priests, and they may have been handpicked by him. But again, we don't really know for sure. During the Ramesside period, certain tomb autobiographies indicate that yes, the king did pick the high priest, but how much of that is true, or how much of it is just a high official wanting to say, I was so good, the king picked me, to the exclusion of all others. There's always an element of self-promotion in these texts.
Yes.
And if you can tell us a little bit, what are the kinds of food that they preferred, the ancient Egyptians, or I don't know?
Very much like what we eat today.
So still more or less the same?
Yeah, so especially the foods that are eaten specifically on Shem el-Nissim, which is Easter Monday according to the Coptic Orthodox calendar. The fish, leeks, spring onions, radishes, lettuce.
But then, well, moving on to that kind of food as well, but how did the Shem el-Nissim holiday develop across the age then, in that sense?
I don't think
was it always like this, or it's developed over the years? Or
the idea of having a picnic is universal and it's ancient. Just family gatherings to celebrate food or to celebrate any feast. If you think of it, really, food is central to the celebration of any feast. So even for Maraim, there's certain kinds of foods that are eaten there, and food is a clear marker of the occasion. And the
So in ancient Egypt, every festival has its own food to be marking it?
No, in modern Egypt.
Modern Egypt.
In modern Egypt.
But in ancient Egypt, it was not the same way.
But they used to have the same thing, the salted onion and the leek as well?
In ancient times, they ate pretty much what we eat today. That is local to Egypt. So, for instance, chickpeas, lentils, all these crops are local to Egypt, emmer, barley, all these crops are local to the country. So that's what they ate. Regarding your question as to whether they ate specific foods on specific festivals, that's more tricky. We know that certain priests were forbidden from eating certain types of fish, but that's because of their priestly role. We don't have the one-to-one correlation in ancient times that we observe today in modern Egypt. Or, for Easter it's eggs, or for Maraim it's lamb.
So just what I'm trying to just find out. So specifically the shaminissim, the salted fish and the leeks and everything, was that the same thing happening back then, or is this a modern Egyptian?
Oh, that's ancient Egyptian.
That's ancient Egyptian. So they used to have that too.
Yes, because you have to. In the absence of ice boxes and fridges, salting or drying, or drying food or salting it is a way of preserving it. So this is a very Egyptian tradition, and shamanism is a very Egyptian festival. Therefore, the food that's eaten on that day is very typically Egyptian, ancient Egyptian.
So how did it develop across the ages, shamanism, from ancient Egypt till now? Is there any difference between now and then?
Yes and no, in that there was a spring festival and people got out and had food. I could not probably give you a decade by decade chronology of how it developed. Shamanism, you have to remember, also is very unique to Egypt. So it's not found in the West, it's not found in other Arab countries, so that's one circumstantial piece of evidence to indicate that it is truly Egyptian.
Were there any types of food that were restricted for the ordinary people in ancient Egypt and only restricted for the kings and queens and the priests then?
Well, it was a matter of the economy. So whoever had more could eat more. Just like today.
Same way now.
Just like today.
Yeah.
So it's very much a matter of economy and who could afford what.
But Doctor, how would they determine the date of shamanism when the night and day were equal back then? Were they? How
no, they were not equal. That's a very good question. Actually, they were equally divided into 12 hours each, but each hour was of a different length. So whereas today we have a fixed length for each hour, 60 minutes, in ancient times they had a water clock that looked like a vessel. So at the top it's wider and at the bottom it's narrower, and the first hour of the night would be the top one and the last hour of the night would be the bottommost one, which means that if you are looking at the volume of water that drips from it, the last hour of the night is much shorter than the first hour of the night.
So then they would be able to determine the date of shamanism? I mean, in what
the dates had to do with the sun and less with and in terms of the dating today in modern Egypt, the farmers and the peasants use the ancient Egyptian calendar for their agricultural cycle. Today it's known as the Coptic calendar, but the Coptic calendar is the same as the ancient Egyptian. So in terms of setting a day of the year according to the Egyptian calendar, that happened through what we know today as Coptic months, but it's actually ancient Egyptian months and the names are the same.
So what did the ancient Egyptians call shamanism back then?
It is possible that it is the beautiful feast of the valley.
The beautiful feast of the valley.
Yeah, although we're not quite sure. It's one of the candidates for that festival.
And the valley stands for the Valley of the Nile, of course.
The Nile Valley.
Yes.
Indeed.
And in what era did they start to celebrate the feast?
It's supported in the Maqrizi, so at least from the 13th century, but probably dates to much older. In terms of the beautiful feast of the valley, that dates in Hatshepsut in the 18th dynasty.
So why do you eat onions and eggs today?
Well, onions, because that's the onions and salted fish. I mean, the key is the fasikh, actually, the salted fish, and the muluha, and all the very aromatic, very salty fish. That's the ancient Egyptian component of it. And then all the greenery that goes with that, the spring onions, the leeks. Again, that's the Egyptian factor. You have to keep in mind that food is one of the most defining elements of identity, like the cuisine of a country, French cuisine, Italian cuisine. So think of fasikh as the ultimate Egyptian cuisine in a way.
The salted fish.
The salty fish. Extremely salty.
Yes.
It's very aromatic, as you said.
Indeed.
It should be smelled in other countries as well. So, Doctor, what about the colors that we actually wear on this day? Does this have anything to be doing with ancient Egypt as well?
In terms of spring colors, strong
Colors, maybe.
Well, Egyptians used very strong colors anyway, so lots of reds, lots of deep greens, and a very true blue, yellow as well.
People take Shamanissim as the start of like the summer and change their colors and their clothes, and they mark Shamanissim. They're like, we're going to start wearing our summer clothes after Shamanissim or Shamanissim.
Yeah, it's the advent of spring.
Exactly. It's always that.
Yes, and the beautiful feast of the valley, was this the main feast back then in ancient Egypt?
One of three main ones.
Three main ones. What are the other two?
The other one is the Opet festival, and that involved the taking out of the statue of Amun-Ra from his sanctuary in Karnak and taking it to the temple of Luxor. So the statue was placed in a boat and taken on shore. Actually, the boat was carried on shore, and then the trip back was via the river. And to this day, that is manifested in the Mulud of Abu al-Haggag, which is a local Theban feast celebrated in the same way. People still carry boats, they look modern, they don't look ancient, and they have forgotten the connection. But one of the main reasons, and that's a very clear connection that's been established between...
What does it stand for now?
It's a local saint. So the saint is venerated because he's a blessed man, but the way it's celebrated is ancient Egyptian, with the boat processions. On shore one time, and then on the river another time. And that's been clearly documented since the 80s.
Yes, and the third festival.
The third festival is called the Decade Festival, and it didn't happen just once, it happened once every 10 days. And again, it involved the statue of the god being taken this time to the western bank of the Nile, where he would commune with his ancestral gods in the valley, in the temple of Medinat Habu, and then the god himself would be rejuvenated and come back to the east refreshed and young.
Once every 10 days, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yes, about 3 times a month, and about tens of times every year.
Exactly. Decade festival, once every 10 days, not every 10 years.
Dr. Maraim have a very beautiful feast of the valley, of course, on Monday. Dr. Maraim, the Associate Professor of Egyptology at the American University of Cairo. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And we'll be going out right now to be watching a report on Yahya Khalil and the jazz music here in Egypt.